Hi, I'm Dylan Paris, and today I want to talk about the Ableton Push. Not this one though. This is the Ableton Push 2. It is currently, as of March 2021, early March, the newest Push, but it's also, I think, 5 years old. So we're probably due for something like a Push 3. Now, I recently made a video about why you would buy a Push 2 in 2021, like I did, and I don't regret it. You can get them for about $550 on average used, sometimes cheaper, sometimes a little more expensive, and they are a great deal at that price. However, as I've been using it, I've found a couple of things. One, it's probably my favorite music making device I've ever used. It's extremely intuitive, extremely powerful, and if you use custom racks like I do, you can access the presets and parameters for most of the virtual instruments you would want to use that aren't made by Ableton. But there are some things that I would love to see improved, and that's what this video is going to be about. Before I get too far ahead of myself, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps channels like mine grow, and seeing the growth of this channel over the last 2 years has been amazing and totally convinces me to keep doing this every week. So thank you so much to everyone who's done that. Along with that, I've got music on Spotify under my name, Dylan Paris, linked below, and I would be so stoked if you checked that out. All right, let's keep going. So Push 2, a lot to love, but I do have a couple of pain points that certainly aren't going to make me get rid of it, but I would love to see them updated in a Push 3. The first one is getting rid of the power cable. If you've used a Machina Mark III, then you know that that device can connect to a computer with just a single USB cable, which illuminates the entire machine and allows it to serve as an audio interface and connect to your computer. Now, with the Push, you not only don't get the audio interface, which we're gonna get to later, but you also have to run external power along with the USB connection if you want the pads and the screen to light up enough to actually really be usable. So it's not a deal breaker because I also need to run power to my computer. It's not like I wouldn't want to have power around, but it would be nice to have just one less cable to worry about and have it all be powered and illuminated, as well as communicating with your computer all over a single USB cable. So that's the first one. And I know other people have talked about that as well. I think it's a big gripe and I hope they fix it. The second one kind of goes along with what I was just talking about with the Machina, but it would be really cool if this was also an audio interface. I don't need a ton of ins, maybe like 1 or 2 line ins, but having a headphone and stereo out of this would be so cool. On Macs, it's not a big deal because Mac's audio drivers are pretty great and you don't usually need an external sound card. But on PC, sound drivers are kind of hit or miss. So I use this first gen Complete Audio 6 as my audio interface. And when I'm just jamming and making something, it'd be really nice to just have headphones coming out of the Push and not have to have an external device or ASIO for all drivers. Something else I'd really like to see was more on the software side, but I went on a journey with groove boxes and different music making hardware over the last year or two. And through using devices like the OPZ, the MC707, the Electron Digitone, and some additional boxes, I started to really appreciate having a standalone workflow in a machine like this. Now for me, I am okay having my laptop there because I get a lot of additional power out of this and I can use a lot of additional sounds and synthesizers that I couldn't do on something like a Machina Plus or any of the aforementioned other groove boxes. However, because most of those devices are designed to be used alone, most of the screens and parameters and things you're gonna adjust are designed specifically for that and function pretty intuitively. Something I don't love about the Push, especially if you don't use custom VST racks, is how much of the experience seems designed to push you back to the screen. I don't necessarily think Ableton views the Push as a full-on replacement device for the visual interface. Obviously, they put a lot of time and energy into that, user interface and that software experience. But personally, when I use the Push, I just turn my laptop screen off and only use the Push. So I would love to see better automatic mapping and configuration for VSTs, or even something like the NKS system, which Native Instruments has, which allows developers to create a version of their plugin that's specifically designed for the parameters and screens on the Machina. I would love to see an opening up so that it's not just Ableton's analog and operator and some of their effects that are powerful and beautiful on here, but like almost any VST you could want to run, if there was a way to auto map parameters and maybe even change the GUI so that important parameters were moved ahead. Some of the custom VST racks that I got from Timbers and Tones do some of that, and I don't want to put anyone like that out of business, but for example, when a new series of synthesizers or VSTs come out, like the Arturia V Collection 8, a whole bunch of people have to go and then create custom maps for it, or you have to hold off from updating because you don't want to break compatibility with the custom rack mapping that you've already bought, which is kind of where I am. I have the V Collection 7, and that's as far as timbres and tones went. So if I get V Collection 8, then I'm not even sure I'm going to have the same kind of interaction with the newer synths, such as the Juno 106, which I don't believe timbres and tones have mapped yet, or at least hadn't when I bought the V Collection mapping. So that's a little heady, but basically I would like it if more plugins automatically had parameters mapped to the push and were easier to use and prettier. And maybe that's too big of an ask, but I really treat the push like a standalone device with a computer attached to it. And that kind of goes to the last interesting point. When people talk about the Ableton Push 3, a lot of the rumors are standalone. There was a leak last year that turned out to be fake, where someone had essentially photoshopped a bunch of inputs and outputs on the back of a Push 2 and suggested that there was going to be a fully standalone Ableton Push. And there's a lot of dialogue about fully standalone. I think the Machina Plus is a really good answer for why I don't necessarily want a standalone push, especially if it pushed the price up to above $1,000, which I feel like it might. For the kind of hardware I want to even fit in here, you'd have to imagine it would be fairly expensive. You know, my computer has an 8-core i7 with 32 gigs of RAM, as well as 2 terabytes of M.2 storage. Now, there's no way you would even probably fit that in here and get the same form factor. But even if you did, it would probably be too warm unless you underclocked it or had a built-in fan. There's a lot of reasons why I think if you tried to put a computer in this, there's a really good chance it wouldn't necessarily be as powerful as you might want. And they might use something like an Intel Atom processor, which is what the Machina Plus uses. And the idea for me of paying $1,400 for essentially, I don't know if you remember those really little laptops before Ultrabooks, they were like, and before smartphones, it was like UMPC, I think. There were these tiny laptops and they had Intel Atom processors in them. And that is the, very weak underpowered processor that's in the Machina Plus. I personally don't want to pay an extra $400, $500 on top of the list price for this, which I think is $800 still, so that I can get a crappy UMPC back end to run just the Ableton synths, because that's the other thing. If the standalone push doesn't run a version of Windows or Mac OS, and it's certainly not going to run Mac OS, then it's very unlikely that third-party plugins are going to work on it. That's a problem that the MPCs have in standalone mode. That's a problem that the Machina Plus has in standalone mode. Third-party plugins just aren't a factor because the software needs to be written for a new operating system. So it's very likely if they made a standalone Ableton Push 3 that you would just have Ableton synths and some sampling and the sequencer. That could be enough for folks, and it could be interesting if it was a why not both situation where when you unplugged it from a computer, you still had Ableton synths and sequencing and sampling, and then when you plugged it back into a computer, you had everything else and could work on the same projects. That to me is pretty fascinating and is basically what the Akai Force is, but with Akai's synthesizers and plugins, which I think are worse than Ableton's custom synthesizers and plugins. But when you think about how much power something like Wavetable uses, like Wavetable on my powerful computers will often spike CPU parameters to like 16 to 20% on a single Wavetable instance, you're probably not going to be able to run a lot on an Atom-based standalone push. I would love to be surprised, right? But right now, there's no one really competing with Apple when it comes to ARM-based super powerful small processors. And if they go in that direction, they'll likely have to rewrite all of their software for ARM, which I'm not sure if they've done yet. You could enter a situation where if they've written all their stuff for Apple's hardware, then maybe they could use a Qualcomm processor and get similar speeds, but that is just far in the future conjecture. I'd like to be wrong, but I don't think I am on this point. So yes, the big things I want to see on a Push 3 are a single cable for data, audio, and power, preferably something like USB-C, although you'd want a really good solid port because USB-C ports can get kind of finicky. Hope that they have some kind of strengthening around the port, similar to how they do for this one. I would like an audio interface, specifically at least audio out, but also audio in potentially, and maybe even phantom power, but that could be too big of an ask. And I would like to see more automatic parameter mapping and customization for third-party plugins on the Push. Those are my big 3 things I would like on a Push 3. As far as standalone goes, I think it's interesting, but I would hate to see lackluster or weak standalone included that pushes the price up above $1,000. If they kept the price at $800, added all the features I was talking about, and made it standalone, that would be interesting. But given that just the controller costs $800 MSRP right now, I don't think that's possible. Anyway, thanks for watching. Consider liking and subscribing, and I hope you have a great week ahead. All right.